Today we're talking about Destiny 2. Long have you waited? It's finally there. After already having had its console beta, we now finally got the PC beta. First part of it was closed only for those who pre-ordered, and then 2 days of open beta. I did not pre-order the game because I didn't want to, spend money on things I know nothing about yet, so I waited for the open beta to test it out. And in this video I'll give you a little bit of an insight of how that went down and of my verdict of the game so far. I know that there are very divided opinions on the game. We'll look at both the pros and cons in order to give you the best reflection possible. So if you're like me and you haven't played Destiny 1, the first question would obviously be, what is Destiny about? Well, in general, it's a sci-fi grindy shooter, multiplayer focused and somewhat of a crossover between, if I had to name two games, Halo and Borderlands. That means a lot of grinding, a lot of trash enemies you get through to get to a bigger boss enemy and get some nice loot out of it, combined with visuals that remind you a lot more of the Halo world, which is not surprising considering that the developer is the same developer that also made Halo. The gameplay footage will kind of speak for itself here, so I don't really need to say more about that. Instead, let's begin with how you're introduced to the game. We've got a longer intro cutscene that kind of gives you a bit of the backstory from the transition from Destiny 1 to Destiny 2 to how your character ends up where he ends up. All not too exciting in terms of story writing, I would say. It's just, things get blown up and things happen. But that's actually fine, especially when you consider that a huge part of the audience wasn't involved in Destiny 1's lore simply due to the fact that they haven't played it because they're PC players. And at the same time, those who are more involved with it will take away enough of their piece of lore from the characters that they recognize. There is not too much teaching the mechanics and you kinda just get thrown into the action, but really it isn't all too necessary anyways. It plays like pretty much any shooter and you get the basics down very, very quickly. There are some more special abilities that every class has and so on that kinda take you some time to figure out, and if you're not the kind of person to look at the controls right away, not the type of guy or girl to read a manual, so it depends a little bit on how quickly you want to progress in that regard, but it's definitely enough to make it through the first mission, no matter if you're gonna learn much about it beforehand or not. The training mission is also very unpunishing. You can die, that can happen, and if it happens, you just respawn. Nothing crazy to it, that's literally as simple as it gets, and you will not be set back in that level very much. You just go through it step by step. After some cutscenes, you then end up seeing the main screen for the first time. In the main screen, you have 3 game modes. You have a casual PvP mode, you have a competitive PvP mode, and you have a PvE story mission basically, and those are the things you can do in the beta. You also get the option to invite your friends, which is something that is coming in handy in a multiplayer game that is mostly focused around playing with your friends. I kinda missed the memo where one of the modes is competitive whereas the other one is casual PvP, and ended up queuing the competitive PvP mode first and got completely fucking demolished. Not only am I horrible at shooters to begin with because my aim is fucking awful, I also happen to accidentally have mouse acceleration on and not realizing that on my new PC, so that fucked me even more. And then I also didn't factor in the fact that the enemy players may have played Destiny 1 on the console already and have a better idea of how the mode works, or may have played on the day before a lot depending on how addicted they were to the game. So I just got completely shit-stomped and I was like, I'm not gonna touch that mode again for quite a while. Next, I queued for the casual PvP mode, which was way more up my alley, and I actually was able to compete against the other players there. The queue times were short, the loading into the game was very quick, so not much of an issue there, and then you kinda just end up straight in the action. The downtimes in this mode compared to competitive are significantly shorter because you don't have to wait till the end of the round to respawn. You respawn right away and you keep capturing your points or whatever. Feels a lot more fluid and a lot more appropriate for the kind of game that Destiny is, where you can very quickly kill an enemy with the right skill. Last but not least, we went into the PvE mode to play the available mission. That one, to me, felt like the core content of Destiny 2. The visuals were just absolutely stunning. The storyline progressed through the mission, though I didn't really pay too much attention to that, to be honest. And the fights were nice. So no complaints about that one. That's how I thought the game would be, and it delivered in that expectation. Even though we wiped a few times on the last boss, the game mode didn't feel overly challenging, it didn't feel like it was gonna be tryhard all the way. I'm assuming that this is more of a beginner, not even raid, but a beginner mission to get people into the game, to give them a taste of what's yet to come and ease them into it without having the feeling of frustration right away, where I expect later bosses to be a lot harder than this one. But it was interesting enough to keep you on your toes a little bit. You still had to pay attention, like I said, we wiped a few times because we really had no clue what to do yet and we needed to coordinate stuff. And once we figured out how the first basic mechanics of the boss worked, it became a lot easier. So that is definitely how a boss should work in my opinion. I think it's a very good approach, though I would like to see more challenge for later bosses because really I played friggin' awful and we still didn't really wipe too much. And that brings us to the pros and cons. Let's begin with the pros. The graphics and visuals. Absolutely amazing, looks absolutely stunning, 10 out of 10 graphics, given you have a PC that is able to run them. There are some downsides to them too, we'll get to that later. The next one is the feeling of shooting, I will call it the sound that you hear when you fire a shot, the responsiveness of the guns, and the melee animations, which are super satisfying. Feels really good, feels really fluid, feels like you're in that fight, so that's perfect for me, and I think this is always an important point. If a gun sounds like I'm firing wet noodles, it's not gonna feel satisfying in a combat sense in such a game. Talk about combat, the combat system in itself is what I would say intricate enough. It's not the most complex in the world, but there are decent boss fights with different mechanics, and I think we will see more of that in the main game, more complex ones obviously, as well as abilities on every character, but not an overload of abilities. As somebody who's coming from the MMO scene originally, with MOBAs being the secondary choice, I would say that I would like some more abilities than the 3 I had by default, but there are some options to expand those. And that's the next plus, the playstyle variation. You have different ability sets and specs that you can use and therefore quickly change your playstyle, quickly change your talent system depending on how you want to play, and I think that is a very good approach, the typical approach in that genre, and that will allow you to have some variation within your abilities regardless. Another thing that had good variation so far were the enemies. We saw different types of enemies in different combat scenarios. The question is, will this last? Obviously the beta is a very small look into the game, and there could still be the circumstance that in the beta we see more variation and then in the game itself we always face the same enemies. Hopefully that's not going to be the case. The interface is rather simple but straightforward, gives you all the information you need, and I have no complaints about it. The optimization is, from what I've heard, very good. Obviously I was running on the highest settings, so hard to say what's below that. Depending on the age of your PC, obviously the performance may struggle, but from what I've heard so far, also on low settings games, on lower end PCs, it seems to work pretty damn well. The multiplayer or co-op is very, very easy. You get friends through the Blizzard launcher if you want to, and then you have your friend list in game. People can join you from your friend list if you have that allowed for them, which I think is a nice touch. So they can join you into your team as long as you have the option ticked. If you don't want that, you take it away. So that's a cool feature. And overall, it just seems like it's very, very simple, very straightforward to get your friends into your team quickly. And I think that is something that's often underrated in these kind of games, because a game that revolves so much around playing with your friends has to have some sort of quick and simple system. And last but not least, the game seems to be a very stable port. It is a port more or less after all. It's kind of debatable if it's more of a port or if it's just something that was developed for two platforms at the same time. But if we're looking at it as a port, then it has very, very good performance. Obviously better visuals than the console version with higher frames, and I did not see any of the typical hiccups that you would see from a port. And after all this happy, shiny promotion for the game, let's get to the cons. Let's get to the negative sides of it. First one, PvP with a big question mark. It seems rather unbalanced. Especially in the competitive mode, I felt that even though obviously I was terrible at it, the way it works was just kind of unrefined. A combat system that is kind of focused around quickly killing an enemy with your various abilities or by picking up sniper bullets across the map, where you can easily one or two shot someone, but at the same time having a scenario where you have long spawn timers between the rounds just didn't feel satisfying. I understand something like that in a game like Counter-Strike or Siege, where there's a lot of positioning going on and you are cornering a lot more, but that's not even possible to the same degree in the Destiny map, so that felt very strange, that did not feel satisfying yet, but then again, a question mark here because it may just have been because I was bad at it. At the same time, it's odd that the casual mode felt so much more satisfying in comparison. The next one, enemies can feel very bullet spongy at times. This is intended as far as I know, this is how the franchise kind of works, but it still can get a bit tedious if you're fighting a group of enemies and it's not really a challenge, you're not really at any risk of dying, but they keep soaking up those bullets for no good reason. Then, we also haven't seen much of the game as a whole. We've seen a little window into it that looked very nice, but if Bungie intends to do so, they could also just look to make that particular part look very, very nice and the rest is just kinda eh. The next one is a point where I just hope it gets removed entirely. Apparently, currently, with controllers, you have aim assist on PC. This will not matter too much for high-level players, because they aim better with a mouse, no doubt about that. But especially around lower ranks, it will have a massive impact. Apparently, people are playing the game with gamepads at the moment intentionally over mouse and keyboard just to get this aim assist, because it just seems to be a bit too good, a bit too functional on those levels of play. And as such, I hope it just gets taken out of PvP at least, or maybe turned down a little bit, because the big issue that could arise otherwise is that people abuse it in a way where they turn on aim assist with a mouse. And yes, this is possible with certain tools. And then you would have just very good aim through the mouse already, plus the aim assist. And while that might feel wonky for a little bit, it would definitely benefit you in the long run, and I hope we just don't see that happening and just have the aim assist as something PvE exclusive maybe. Then there's a tiny feature that I just found very questionable, which is your voice being on, your microphone being on by default when you first jump into the game, and that's just kind of odd. I just don't want people to hear me right away, and it should just be off by default, and if I want to turn it on, I'll turn it on. I felt that the game was somewhat heavy on the eyes. May sound a little weird, I may sound like an old man here, but it just has a very high amount of blue light and flashing lights and everything. And like I said, the visuals look very nice, but at the same time, it felt a bit taxing. It felt a bit like I wouldn't want to play it for too many hours in a row. I think it may have been the settings, and this is the downside here. I think that even though you could just put everything on max, you want to possibly have some settings lower or off, especially motion blur is one of those settings that a lot of people just don't like, and I would like for that, you know, to be a little more clarified in the menu, at least at the beginning, so that you're more encouraged to set up the profile for your own liking and maybe get rid of some of those effects. Then there's this tiny thing where I felt that in some areas falling down wasn't very obvious. You had to fall down somewhere, but it looks like that if you fall down you die, as you would in other areas. And you're just kind of walking around, wandering off, trying to find out where you have to go until you realize, oh wait, I can actually fall down here, which annoyed me personally a little bit. And last but not least, there's something that's not necessarily the game itself, but rather the reviews around it, which are surprisingly, or not so surprisingly, uncritical. Basically, if you look up any review for it, most of them will be like, yes, it's so amazing, PC version is so much better, you should absolutely, definitely buy this game right now. And this gives you a very good taste of heavily paid promotion. And heavily paid promotion in itself is not necessarily a good sign, obviously, because that means that the publisher will want you to buy the game right away, instead of waiting for the reviews for the game, which means that possibly they are a bit skeptical about the reviews after the initial release. So hyping the game incredibly highly after having played one PvE mission and a little bit of PvP is something that, you know, feels a little bit biased to me. So as such, I am not too sure how to feel about that. And I would like to let you guys know that you should be critical about the reviews that are coming out at the moment. I would personally, in conclusion, say Destiny feels like a very solid, polished game so far from what we've seen. I would not recommend buying the game right away unless you're really super hyped for it and you've played Destiny 1 and are really interested in the lore, but rather wait for a week until the people that have played it right after release have a little more feedback on it and some more on the other missions and how the long-term content is and whatnot. I will get it beforehand, obviously, because I'm a content creator, and for me it makes sense to make content for the stuff when it comes out, so I will give you my verdict later down the road as well. But I would say, unless you have a very, very deep urge or you want to play with your friends on the first day, there's no harm in just waiting a week, because on release day the servers will probably be unstable anyways, as they usually are in big releases. With that, I hope I was able to give you a good overview of the game. If you're not subscribed yet, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell, it really helps me out. See you for the next one tomorrow. Thank you guys very much for watching. Duke Sloth, out.